It was just past midnight when I found myself wandering the edge of the old farm, the moon barely cutting through the thick fog. Every step on the damp grass sounded impossibly loud, yet there was a silence deeper than anything I had known. A faint, flickering light hovered in the distance, behind the dilapidated barn, and I could swear it pulsed in rhythm with my own heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of cold earth and old hay, and somewhere a loose shutter rattled in a way that felt almost deliberate. I thought I was alone, but then came the softest rustle behind me. So subtle, I almost convinced myself it was the wind. I wanted to turn back, but some invisible pull, kept me moving closer. That's when I saw it, half hidden in the shadows, watching, waiting, and I realized this night would not let me leave untouched. The sun was low, spilling pale gold across the field. The corn stretched taller than I remembered, swaying gently, though the air felt still. Fog rolled in low, curling around my ankles, carrying a damp chill that seeped through my shoes. Each step sank slightly into the damp soil. The stalks whispered against one another. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I heard it, something softer, sharper, calling my name. A rustle, just behind me, then another to the left. I paused. My breath hung heavy. Shadows bent oddly between the stalks, stretching longer than they should, leaning toward me. A pale shape appeared, almost too thin to be real. It stood motionless, silent, framed between the rustling corn. I blinked. It vanished. The smell came next. Something faint, almost burnt, lingered in the fog. There was no fire. Nothing had burned. Yet the air clung to it, a subtle, acrid reminder that I wasn't alone. My heartbeat pushed against my chest. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the corn moved differently than before. Each stalk seemed to lean toward the path I walked, listening. The fog thickened. My hands brushed wet leaves. Cold droplets clung to my skin. I shivered, though I couldn't tell if it was the air or something watching. I thought I saw movement again. A flicker of pale, half seen between the rows. A form that didn't belong. It disappeared before I could focus, leaving only the sway of empty stalks. Footsteps? I wasn't sure. Or maybe just the soil shifting under my own weight. The sound echoed strangely like something mimicking me. The silence afterward was heavier. It pressed against my ears, filling every pause between my breaths. Even the fog felt watchful, settling around my shoulders, brushing my neck with invisible fingers. I wanted to turn back, but the path had vanished behind me. The field seemed endless, the corn taller, closing in. A whisper brushed past my ear. I froze, not words I could understand, just a soft, curling hiss that lingered, twisting around my thoughts. I moved again, slowly, each step careful, measured. The shadows stretched longer, twisting unnaturally. Something pale lingered in the corner of my vision, gone when I dared to look. The smell returned, faintly charred, almost metallic. I swallowed, tasting it on my tongue. The fog seemed to thicken with it, curling around my legs, my hands, filling my chest with tight, cold pressure. I reached the edge of the field, or thought I did. The corn swayed behind me. Tall and indifferent, the whispering followed, soft, almost curious, tracing my steps. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but I could feel it, the presence of something pale, patient, waiting in the fog, watching. I stepped into the open, into the last thin light of dusk. The field stayed behind me, still, silent, as if it had never moved. Yet, the whisper lingered, and I knew it would not let me go. The barn stood at the edge of the field, old and weathered. Its wood smelled dry, brittle, like it had been holding secrets for decades. The fading light of dusk made it look smaller, yet somehow heavier. A lantern flickered inside, moving as if guided by unseen hands. I paused at the threshold, feeling the air change. It carried the scent of old hay, dust, and something faintly metallic, almost like iron. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open. Shadows stretched long across the floor, twisting unnaturally. They didn't move like my own, though they mimicked me in small, subtle ways. I stepped closer, each footfall soft, careful. The lantern swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. A hum rose, low and almost comforting, vibrating through the beams and into my chest. But then it changed. The hum warped into whispers I couldn't understand. It was quiet but insistent, curling into my thoughts. I stopped, heart hammering, feeling each word like it brushed my skin. The shadows shifted again. They pooled near the corners, gathering, stretching toward me. The lantern light danced against the walls, flickering faster, though I was still. It felt like the barn was breathing. Slowly, patiently, I moved deeper inside. The wooden floor groaned under my weight. Every creak amplified in the stillness. The hum pulsed along the beams above me, almost matching my heartbeat. I realized I wasn't just hearing the whispers. I was feeling them. Something brushed against my arm. I froze, searching for the source. Nothing, just the cold, empty air. I reached the center of the barn. The lantern's glow touched every corner, yet shadows lingered in impossible shapes. I could see them bending, twisting where the light didn't reach. The whispers grew softer. They ebbed and flowed like waves against the walls, almost like they were guiding me, or warning me. I wanted to leave, but curiosity kept my feet rooted. Every step back seemed longer than it should be, every glance around heavier. The hum rose again, vibrating through the soles of my shoes, through the floor, into my chest. The door creaked again behind me, a slow, deliberate warning. I didn't turn. I could feel eyes on me, though I was alone. Something waited, patient, silent, studying the way I breathed. The lantern swung once, sharply, though the air was still. A shadow moved across the wall, longer, sharper, then froze. I held my breath. Everything hung on that single, suspended second. Then the barn settled. The hum faded into silence, soft and complete. The shadows retreated into corners, dissolving into the wood and dust. The lantern swayed gently, as if nothing had happened at all. I left without looking back. The air outside was cooler, cleaner, but the barn's presence clung to my skin. I could still hear the faint hum in my chest, the soft, whispering echoing behind my thoughts. It followed me into the fog, patient, persistent, waiting. I didn't step into that barn again, but I can still see the flicker of that lantern, swinging just beyond the threshold, and I know the shadows are still there, moving, watching. The ladder groaned beneath my hands as I climbed. Each step creaked in protest, echoing up into the rafters. The barn smelled of dry hay, faintly sweet at first, like summer afternoons. But the sweetness turned sour, thick and sharp, curling in my nose. The air felt heavier the higher I went. I reached the hayloft, pausing to listen. Footsteps echoed above me. They were slow, deliberate, heavier than mine, yet the loft was empty. I froze, straining to hear. Each exhale sounded louder than it should, mingling with the unseen rhythm. Shadows twisted along the beams, stretching across the hay. One passed quickly, too fast, brushing the corner of my eye. I thought I saw something crouched, pale, moving between the rafters. Then it was gone. The floorboards whispered beneath my weight. Every small groan seemed amplified, like the barn was holding its breath. My own breathing tangled with another, deeper, heavier, yet impossible to trace. I couldn't tell if it was mine or something else. The scent shifted again, sharp and metallic, as if blood had been spilled long ago. It hung in the corners of the loft, curling around the beams. The shadows responded, stretching, bending, lingering in shapes that shouldn't exist. I wanted to move, to leave, but my legs felt rooted. The footsteps returned, a soft cadence above me, circling, pacing. I counted them, trying to stay calm, but the pattern never repeated, always just out of reach, teasing. The hay rustled behind me. I turned slowly. Nothing, just a movement of the loft, or the presence of something patient, unseen, watching. A cold draft slipped along my neck, brushing my skin like a finger. The floor groaned once more, heavier this time. I swallowed, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. The loft seemed to lean in, silent but alive. I pressed my palms to the wooden beam, steadying myself. The echoes above slowed, then stopped entirely. Silence fell, thick and oppressive. It pressed against my ears, my chest, filling the lawful weight. I didn't dare move for what felt like minutes. Then I crept toward the ladder, every sound magnified. The shadows seemed to shift, following me as I descended. I felt their gaze lingering on my back, pale and patient. Reaching the ground, I stepped onto solid earth again. The barn seemed ordinary now, still and quiet, but I could feel the loft above me, alive in memory. The heavy rhythm of those footsteps still echoed in my chest long after I left. I glanced back once. The hayloft waited silently, empty, or so it appeared. The farmhouse sat silent, its windows dark and grimy. The night pressed against the walls, cold and heavy. Fog curled along the ground, brushing my ankles as I walked closer. One window caught my eye, a flicker of movement, subtle, almost imagined. I froze. A pale face appeared, blank, wide-eyed, staring. It lingered for only a moment, then vanished when I blinked. I stared into glass, searching. My own reflection stared back, mingling with it, as if the window had folded our images together. The cold night air clung to my skin, damp and biting. Goosebumps rose along my arms. The house was still. No footsteps, no wind, yet the feeling of being watched pressed close, intimate. I could sense eyes tracing me, lingering in corners, in shadows that didn't belong. I stepped closer, drawn by a mix of dread and curiosity. The glass remained dark, reflective, but something shifted behind it. A faint, almost imperceptible movement, a twitch, a blink, like the house itself was breathing, patient, waiting. I held my breath. The fog swirled around my ankles, wrapping me in cold silence. The reflection felt heavier, thicker, pressing against my vision. A sudden chill crawled up my spine. The window wasn't just glass anymore. It was a threshold, a place where something unseen could touch me without moving. I stepped back slowly, heart hammering. The pale face didn't return, yet I could feel its memory in the glass, watching, patient, unblinking. The rest of the house seemed to shift subtly, floorboards groaning quietly, shadows gathering in corners, as if the night had deepened behind the walls. I walked away, trying to shake the sensation, but the gaze followed me, lingering in memory. Every reflection, every dark window along the farmhouse path, felt like it could hide that same pale stare. Even as I reached the open field, the chill clung to my skin, and I knew I had not left the house behind. It had left me. The stone well stood at the edge of the overgrown yard, old and cracked. The rope hung frayed, swinging slightly in the chill air. The fog curled around it, thick and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth. I leaned over the edge, peering into darkness, so deep it swallowed the lantern light. A faint echo of laughter rose from below, soft, deliberate, teasing. It made my skin prickle, and I stepped back instinctively. The water inside was black, almost still, but I saw shapes moving. Too quick, too deliberate, like shadows with purpose. They vanished before I could focus, leaving only ripples that reflected the fog. A sudden splash startled me. I stumbled backward, hands brushing against the cold stone. The sound lingered longer than it should, like it had followed me up from the depths. I pressed my fingers to the damp rope, feeling the coarse fibers bite into my skin. The echoes rose again, soft laughter, whispers, something I couldn't place. It felt close, intimate, like the well had eyes hidden just beneath the surface. The night was still otherwise. No wind, no birds, just the water, the fog, the echo of something waiting below. I tried to shake it off, stepping away from the edge. Yet the sensation clung, a weight in my chest. I could feel unseen eyes following my movements, watching each breath, tracing each step. The shapes beneath the water shifted again. Quick flashes of motion, deliberate, intentional, and I realized it wasn't just a reflection of fog or my own trembling hands. Something was there, aware, patient. The cold damp of the well seeped into my fingers, and the laughter, or something like it, rose once more. Not joyous, not playful, but deliberate, echoing warning. I drew back, leaving the stone behind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The gaze from below remained heavy and real, pressing against my chest even as I walked away. The forest around the well was silent, holding its breath. The fog thickened, curling along the ground, and I felt the presence of whatever lurked in the black water, patient, waiting, unblinking. I glanced over my shoulder once. Nothing moved, yet the memory of the shapes, the echo of the laughter, followed me across the yard, into the damp night. Even now, when I think of that well, I can feel those eyes lingering in the dark, and I know they have not forgotten me. The barn door hung heavy, old would warp with age. I reached for it, and it swung open with a violent creak, though the air was still. The sound rattled in the quiet, sharp and sudden, like the barn itself had screamed. Inside, shadows stretched along the walls, twisting in ways that didn't belong. They gathered near the corners, forming shapes that resembled long, bony fingers. I froze, heart hammering, listening to the silence that followed. The smell of dry hay mixed with something acrid, faintly burnt. It clung to the air, heavy and suffocating, as if warning me to leave. A sudden sound tore through the barn, sharp, piercing, and for a heartbeat it felt alive. Watching, I stepped back, hands trembling against the wooden frame. The shadows didn't retreat. They lingered, reaching, stretching along the beams. The lantern light I carried flickered, revealing shapes that should not exist. The barn felt aware. Each creak, each rustle echoed like a heartbeat of its own. I couldn't tell if the sound came from me or from something else. A finger-like shadow brushed against the wall near my shoulder. I jerked away. The air turned cold, heavy, pressing against my skin. Every step I took felt measured, watched, as if the barn itself calculated my movements. I ran. The door groaned behind me, closing with a final, echoing scream. Even as I reached the open air, the memory of those fingers lingered, long, sharp, silent. The night seemed colder now, heavier. The fog curling around the farm carried the faint smell of burnt wood, and though the barn stood quiet, I knew it was waiting. Patient, I glanced back. The shadows had returned to stillness, but I could feel them in my mind, stretching, lingering, a silent warning that the barn had not finished with me. I didn't look back again, but the memory of the fingers followed, etched into the edges of my vision, long after I had left the barn behind. The attic lay above the farmhouse, dark and still. I climbed the narrow stairs, each step releasing a whisper of dust and old wood. The air was thick, stale, carrying the scent of time itself, mothballs, dry beams, and something faintly metallic. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight. Each creak echoed, swallowed by the shadows that clung to the corners. I thought I saw a small figure crouched there, watching me. It disappeared when I blinked. A trick of the light, I told myself, but the feeling didn't fade. The attic seemed hollow, listening to my every thought. The shadows shifted, not with the wind. There was none. They moved independently, curling along the rafters, pooling in corners, stretching unnaturally. A cold draft brushed my cheek, soft but insistent. It carried the faint smell of damp wood, and something older, something that had waited here long before I arrived. I held my breath. Every small sound became magnified. The tapping of a loose board, the groan of a beam, my own shallow breathing, all woven together in a rhythm that wasn't mine. I realized I wasn't just hearing the attic. I was part of it now. Every step, every heartbeat accounted for. Something shifted behind me again, a movement too quick to track, yet deliberate. I dared not turn. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound, pressing against my chest. I took a careful step forward. The shadows seemed to lean closer, stretching along the slanted ceiling, watching. A tiny scrap of movement. A pale shape crouched, patient, flickered at the edge of my vision, gone when I tried to look directly. The attic felt alive. Not warm, not comforting, but aware. Every breath, every inch I moved, was felt. I backed toward the ladder, careful not to make a sound. The rustling followed, subtle, almost playful, curling around the beams. I reached the stairs, heart pounding, and descended slowly. Once on solid ground, I dared to glance up. The attic was empty, or so it appeared. Yet the memory of those pale eyes lingered, waiting, patient, in the corners of my mind. The house was quiet, too quiet for the hour. Night had settled, thick and cold, curling around the edges of the roof. I lay in bed, listening. Soft footsteps above me. I froze. The attic was empty. The floorboards creaked beneath nothing. And yet, each step echoed, deliberate, pacing in patterns I could not trace. Shadows stretched across the ceiling. They shifted slowly, impossibly, leaning as if something hovered just out of reach. A faint breath brushed my neck. Cold, lingering, brushing my skin though I was alone. I tried to convince myself it was a house settling. But the rhythm of the steps, it matched nothing I had ever heard. Heavier, lighter, circling above, always moving closer. The wind pressed against the windows, but the air in the room remained still. Every sound was magnified. My heartbeat, shallow and frantic, mingled with the weight of those footsteps. Pacing relentlessly above, I pulled the covers closer. The darkness felt thick, almost liquid. The ceiling shadows twisted and stretched in ways that were not mine. They waited, patient, watching. The footsteps stopped for a moment. A silence, so complete it pressed against my ears, as if the world had been erased except for me and whatever prowled above. Then they moved again, closer, circling. A faint creak of wood here, a soft thump there. Each sound carried intent, deliberate, like someone or something knew exactly where I was. I lay frozen, listening, feeling the presence on the roof as if it paced just above my skull, patient, relentless. The cold breath returned, grazing my neck, brushing my hair. I didn't move, couldn't move. The night seemed to breathe along with those footsteps. Shadows danced in corners, stretching impossibly long, and the air thickened, heavy with anticipation. I told myself to wait, to breathe slowly, but the pacing continued, circling, tracing shapes I could not see. I felt each step through the ceiling, through the floor, through the bones of the house. Eventually, silence fell. Too complete, too absolute. The absence of sound pressed against me, heavier than the steps had ever been. I lay still, waiting, knowing the rhythm might return at any moment, and that the shadows above the ceiling and the faint cold breath on my neck had not truly left me alone. Behind the farmhouse, the forest thinned, revealing a small, overgrown clearing. The ground was uneven, dotted with weeds and tangled roots. There, half hidden by grass, lay a grave, unmarked, forgotten, yet fresh in its presence. I knelt, pressing my fingers to the soil. It was cold, damp, yet strangely soft, like the earth had been disturbed recently. A faint echo of laughter, or maybe a sigh, rose from the shadows of the trees. Something moved in the darkness. Shapes flickered in the soil's black depth, too deliberate to be imagined. I felt the eyes of something unseen, watching from below, patient and still. A sudden splash of cold air brushed my hand. I jumped back, heart hammering, almost tasting the damp earth on my tongue. The presence lingered, heavier than the fog, more deliberate than the wind. I pressed closer again, drawn by something I couldn't name. A hand pressed against mine, icy and insistent. From beneath the soil, I pulled back sharply, stumbling, the ground uneven beneath my feet. The impression remained, cold, real, unshakable. Silence followed. The forest seemed to hold its breath, leaves motionless, shadows frozen. Even the wind stopped moving, as if the world itself paused to watch. I stepped around the grave, careful not to disturb anything further. The fog drifted in low, curling around my legs and fingers, bringing the faint scent of damp earth and decay. I could feel something lingering beneath the surface, aware of my curiosity, patient in its waiting. I turned to leave, but the memory of that hand stayed with me, cold, silent, unforgiving. Even as I walked back toward the farmhouse, the forest remained unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath for my next step. The grave was empty, yet full of presence, a quiet reminder that some places, though forgotten, never truly let go. I sank to the ground beside a haystack, trying to rest. The straw was dry, rough against my skin, the scent faintly sweet. Fog curled low along the field, cool and damp, settling into the hollows around me. A low hum rose from the air, soft at first, almost friendly, vibrating through the wood beneath me. I tilted my head, listening. The rhythm felt deliberate, too precise to be accidental. Shadows shifted inside the haystack, folding and twisting like smoke. Shapes emerged for a moment, impossible forms barely there, then vanished when I blinked. The hum pulsed closer, vibrating along my spine, matching my heartbeat in a way that made my chest ache. I pressed my palms to the straw, feeling it rustle under unseen fingers. The air thickened, damp and metallic, curling around my wrists and ankles. Something small, patient, watched from within the stack. Aware of my curiosity, the fog pressed against my face, carrying whispers I could not understand. I leaned closer, drawn to the rhythm, yet afraid of what might respond. The shapes shimmered again, fleeting, deliberate, curling like smoke around my hands. I held my breath. The hum rose in volume, almost tangible, vibrating through the soil and hay beneath me. It was close now, circling, patient, waiting. I could feel it in my bones, the presence beneath the straw, studying me. I pulled back slowly, the movement careful, deliberate. The shadows receded, yet the humming lingered, low and persistent. It pressed against my ears, my chest, carrying the weight of something unseen. The haystack was still again, nothing but straw and darkness. But I could feel the memory of a hovering, like a pulse beneath the earth, beneath the wood. Watching, waiting. I left the field slowly, each step careful, fog curling around my legs and lingering on my skin. The hum followed, faint, just at the edge of hearing, as if the haystack itself had breathed my name and refused to let go. The yard was quiet, fog curling along the grass. An old swing hung from the gnarled tree, its chains rusted and still, or so I thought. It swayed slowly back and forth, though I hadn't touched it. The motion was gentle, hypnotic, like someone invisible pushed it with patience. I watched, frozen, the cool mist settling on my skin. A shadow crouched beneath the swing. I blinked and it vanished. The fog shifted, curling in tight spirals around the legs of the tree, pressing close to the earth as if to hold secrets hidden beneath. The silence thickened, heavy and patient. Every step I took echoed too loudly, swallowed by the mist. Yet the swing moved still, rhythmic, deliberate. I reached closer, curiosity warring with unease. The chains rattled softly, whispering against the cold metal. I wanted to touch it, to stop it, but something held me back. The shadow returned, faint, crouched, just beyond sight. Gone again when I dared to look directly. I could feel its gaze, patient and lingering, pressing against my chest, cold and deliberate. The yard seemed alive, the fog holding its breath. The swing continued its quiet rhythm, like the heartbeat of something unseen, patiently waiting, watching. I stepped back slowly, careful not to disturb the motion. The shadow receded into the mist, but the memory lingered, heavier than the fog itself. I left the yard quietly, the swing still swaying, the chains whispering, and the silence watching me walk away. Even now, I can feel it. A presence crouched in the mist, patient, unmoving, and never truly gone. The farmhouse kitchen was quiet, still. The fog outside pressed against the windows, curling into the corners of the room, which smelled faintly of dust and old meals, lingering with the weight of emptiness. A pale light flickered in the corner. Soft, brief, almost playful. I approached slowly, drawn by curiosity and a quiet unease. It vanished as I neared, leaving only shadows that seemed to breathe. The air grew heavier, thick with a presence I could not see. Every small sound, my breath, the creak of floorboards, was amplified, swelling in the stillness like it belonged to something else. Whispers rose behind the walls. Not words I could understand, but deliberate, curling around my thoughts, circling my chest. The flicker returned, smaller this time, deeper in the corner. I leaned closer, cautious, feeling the air chill against my skin. The shadows shifted with it, folding into shapes that didn't belong, stretching and bending where the light could not reach. I pressed my fingers to the counter, grounding myself. The hum of the house, or whatever lingered in it, vibrated softly, like the heartbeat of the shadows themselves. The light pulsed again, faint and deliberate, as if aware of my watching. I stepped back slowly. The flicker vanished, leaving the room dark and heavy. Yet I could feel it pressing against the edges of my vision, aware of my presence, patient in its waiting. The kitchen remained still, but the whispers lingered in the walls, curling around my ears, tracing my thoughts. I left the room, careful not to disturb anything, the memory of that pale flicker lingering, like a heartbeat beneath the floor, reminded me that the house was never truly empty. The hallway stretched long and dark, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my feet. The air was still heavy, carrying the scent of old wood and faint mildew. I moved slowly, each step measured, listening. A sudden chill brushed the back of my neck. Cold, sharp, like someone had exhaled directly onto my skin. I spun around. Empty. Windows shut. Nothing. The temperature dropped further, seeping into my bones. Every breath felt visible, clouding the air in front of me. A faint sigh echoed, soft and deliberate, curling along the walls. I froze, heart hammering. The house felt alive, not in warmth, but in weight. Every shadow seemed to lean, stretching toward me. Every corner held something waiting. I moved again, slower this time. The chill followed, brushing along my arms, my legs, pressing against my chest as if aware of my fear. The sigh rose again, faint but insistent, tracing my steps down the narrow hall. I pressed my hand against the wall. It was colder than the air, almost wet, and I could feel something lingering beneath the surface. The house was listening, waiting. Shadows shifted slightly, bending along the walls and ceiling. The hallway lengthened in my vision, stretching impossibly, and the cold breath returned, curling along my neck, intent, patient, unmoving. I tried to convince myself it was imagination, but the air pressed heavier, and the sigh echoed again, like the house was breathing with me, measuring my heartbeat, mirroring my steps. I reached the doorway at the end, desperate for warmth, for normal air. The shadows didn't follow. Yet I could feel them in my spine, lingering, patient, and the chill, subtle but insistent, remained as if the house had claimed a part of me. Outside, the fog clung to the field, curling around the grass like fingers. I walked slowly, the damp air pressing against my skin, carrying the faint smell of wet earth. Shadows stretched long beneath the gnarled trees, twisting in the pale moonlight. One figure stood beneath a twisted tree, black, featureless, humanoid. It didn't move, but its presence pressed against the edges of my vision. I stepped closer. Each movement seemed to make it stretch further away, elongating unnaturally, as if playing a game I could not understand. I blinked. Gone. A whisper drifted across the field. Soft, indistinct. It followed me as I walked, curling around my thoughts, settling behind my ears like cold breath. The fog swirled, thick and patient, hiding the figure again. Shadows bent strangely, reaching along the ground, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes tracking each step. I tried to steady my breathing, but every exhale sounded louder than it should, mixing with the soft, deliberate rustle of the mist along the grass. I paused, feeling the earth beneath me shift subtly, as if the presence was aware of my heartbeat, aware of every twitch, every motion. The figure returned in a flicker, there, then gone. The whisper followed, curling closer, lingering in the space between footsteps. The fog thickened, wrapping around my legs, pressing into the hollow of my chest. I turned, walking away slowly. The field seemed endless, the gnarled tree behind me, its shadow stretching impossibly long into the night. Even when I reached the farmhouse, the whisper lingered in memory, and I knew the shadow had not left. It followed, patient, silent, waiting for the next step. The corner of the room was dark, filled with shadows that clung to the walls. An old rocking chair sat there, still, or so I thought. A soft creak echoed through the silence. The chair rocked slowly, back and forth, though no wind moved it. I watched, frozen, the mist of my own breath visible in the cold air. Shadows gathered around it, stretching along the floorboards, curling like smoke. I stepped closer. The creaking continued, rhythmic, deliberate, like a heartbeat. Shapes formed in the darkness, pale and twisting, and I realized I had become part of the room's quiet ritual. The floorboards groaned under invisible weight. The shadows shifted, leaning toward the chair, as if drawn to its movement, its patient swaying. I held my breath, hands pressed to my chest. The air thickened, carrying the faint scent of dust and old wood, and something older, something patient, lingered in the corners. The chair stopped suddenly. The room felt hollow, watching, waiting. Then it moved again, slow, deliberate, like it measured time differently than I did. I didn't dare touch it. I didn't dare move. I simply stood, a witness to its quiet rhythm, to the shadows that gathered, bending, stretching, patient and unblinking. Eventually, I stepped back, careful, slow, leaving the room as the chair continued its sway, its creak echoing softly, and the shadows lingering, silent and patient, in the corners where light did not reach. I walked along the property line, fog curling low around my ankles. It swallowed the world, softening edges, muting sound. The air smelled damp, cold, and faintly wet earth. A figure appeared in the mist, pale, wavering like smoke. I called out, my voice muted by the fog. No sound returned. It drifted closer, slow, patient, its form delicate, almost unreal, dissolving into gray around it. The closer it came, the colder the air grew, pressing against my skin, wrapping around my chest and neck like invisible hands. I stepped back, heart hammering, but it followed, unwavering, silent. The fog curled between us, thick and alive, and I could feel its gaze, patient, lingering. The figure swayed slightly, motionless yet moving, like smoke carried by a breeze I could not feel. Every instinct told me to flee, but my legs felt rooted, my breath caught in my chest. I reached out just a little, and the figure wavered, fading into nothing, yet the memory remained, pale, silent, patient. The fog itself seemed to cling, as if holding the figure in the space behind my eyes. I stepped away from the edge of the field, the damp grass brushing my hands, the fog curling tighter around my legs. I didn't turn back, though I wanted to. Even as the morning light began to break, the figure lingered in memory, a shadow in pale mist, watching, waiting, patient in the silence it left behind. The property felt empty again, yet I knew it was not. The figure had left its trace, a weight that followed me long after it vanished. I pressed my ear to the bedroom wall, listening. The house was quiet, still, but the hum rose softly from behind the plaster. Low, vibrating, almost friendly at first. It shifted into words I could not understand. They curled around my thoughts, brushing my mind with unseen fingers. I leaned closer, drawn by curiosity, but aware of the chill crawling along my arms and neck. The hum pulsed in rhythm, deliberate, insistent, as if whatever lingered behind the wall was aware of me. The air around me thickened. Dust hung heavy, the faint scent of damp wood, and old paint curling into my nose. Shadows shifted in the corners, leaning closer, folding over themselves. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling a subtle vibration, like the heartbeat of something alive, patient, just beyond reach. The hum rose, twisting and coiling, then stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that was heavier than any sound. I stepped back, heart hammering, feeling the presence linger in the plaster, in the air, aware of my curiosity, patient, unmoving. Even when I left the room, the faint echo of the hum stayed in my chest, a memory of something deliberate, watching, waiting, just beyond the wall. I pushed the hallway door shut. It creaked, complaining softly, then swung open moments later. I pressed it closed again. The same thing happened. The air in the hall thickened, cold and still, pressing against my skin and ears. Shadows pulled in the corners, waiting, patient. Each time I tried to close the door, it seemed to breathe, a slow, deliberate inhale and exhale that pressed against my chest. I left it open finally. The hall felt heavier now, charged with a presence I could not see. Every small sound, the whisper of floorboards, the creak of the walls, was magnified, deliberate, purposeful. The shadows shifted with me as I moved. They leaned along the walls, stretching unnaturally, pulling around the doorframe, like the doorway itself was alive. I stepped back, watching the gap between the door and frame. It seemed to pulse, almost, as if breathing with something unseen inside the house. A faint sigh carried along the hallway, curling around my thoughts. The door refused stillness. Each time I looked away, it creaked open again. I didn't need to see to know it was watching. Patient, aware, deliberate. I moved down the hallway slowly, careful. The air seemed heavier with every step. Shadows lingered in corners, the presence pressing close, silent but insistent. Even as I reached another room, the sensation remained, pressing in my chest, a reminder that some thresholds in this house should never be crossed. The door waited, patient, and I knew it would not forget me. The bathroom was dark, the mirror fogged faintly from the chill of the night. I leaned closer, brushing a hand along the glass. And then I saw it, a second reflection, just behind me. It mimicked my movements, but slightly delayed, slower, more deliberate. I spun around. Nothing. The mirror held the image. It didn't blink, didn't shift. It watched, faintly smiling, tracing my movements as if measuring me. The air grew cold, thick, pressing against my skin. Shadows pulled around the edges of the bathroom, bending toward the glass, leaning in closer, silent and patient. I stepped back, heart hammering. The reflection continued its mimicry, deliberate, controlled. Every motion of mine was mirrored in slow repetition, as if it existed to study me, to wait. I reached out toward the mirror. The reflection's hand followed, hovering just behind mine. A chill crawled along my arm, sharp and insistent, and I drew back, trembling. The bathroom was still otherwise. No wind, no movement, only the mirror and the slow, deliberate echo of myself that wasn't me. I finally turned away, forcing my back to the glass. The reflection remained, faint and patient, watching me, lingering in its own quiet way. Even when I left the room, the image remained in my mind, deliberate, unblinking, a reminder that sometimes the one staring back isn't you at all. I walked the perimeter of the farm, fog curling low around my ankles, each step pressed into the damp earth, soft and yielding. The night was quiet, heavier than it should be, as if it were holding its breath. Then I noticed the footprints, smaller than mine, trailing behind, shifting closer with each step. I had come alone, yet there they were, pressed into the mist, deliberate, patient. I stopped, heart hammering, listening. The fog swallowed sound, thick and cold, and I could feel a presence pacing just beyond my vision. I took another step. The prints followed. Closer now, always just behind, mirroring my pace. Silent, constant. Shadows curled along the edges of the field, leaning, stretching in impossible ways. The fog pressed against my skin, heavy with damp, and I could sense eyes, unseen but aware, tracking my movements. I turned, scanning the mist. Nothing moved, yet the footprints persisted, fading and reappearing with the rhythm of my steps. I quickened my pace, the fog swirling around my legs. The prints kept pace, relentless, a quiet echo of something patient and unseen. Every sound, my breath, my shoes on the earth, was amplified in the silence, each step measured against the invisible companion in the fog. I stopped again. The footprints ended, or so I thought. A faint shift in the mist suggested they were still there, following, waiting, patient, unseen. Even when I reached the farmhouse, the fog clung to my clothes, and the memory of those footprints pressed against my mind, constant, deliberate, and never truly gone. The attic was quiet, heavy with dust and the scent of old wood. I climbed slowly, each step careful, listening to the floorboards groan beneath my weight. The shadows clung to the rafters, stretching along the slanted ceiling, patient and still. Then I heard it, rustling above me, soft, deliberate, twisting along the beams. I expected the wind, but the house was still. Something else moved there, unseen, patient, deliberate. I leaned closer, heart hammering. The shadows shifted, twisting in ways that weren't mine, folding over themselves, pooling in corners, stretching unnaturally. Pale eyes caught mine for a moment, just glimpses in the dark, reflecting nothing, yet aware. Then gone. The silence returned, heavier than before, like it had been waiting for me to leave. Every breath sounded loud, echoing along the rafters. I could feel the attic itself observing me, every movement, every heartbeat, accounted for. A small shift above, a rustle, soft but deliberate, made the floorboards groan again, echoing through the house. I froze, unsure if it belonged to me or something else. The shadows above coiled, folding, stretching, and I realized I was not alone. Not in sound, not in presence, but in weight. The attic pressed down, patient, alive. I crept toward the ladder, careful not to disturb a thing. The rustling paused, then resumed, circling, pacing, always just above, just out of reach. I descended slowly, heart racing. Once on solid ground, I dared to glance up. The attic was empty, or so it appeared. But the weight of those unseen eyes lingered, patient, deliberate, waiting for the next step. A doorway in the farmhouse hall seemed darker than the rest of the room. I approached slowly, the air thickening with every step. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, soft, deliberate. A faint shape lingered just beyond the frame, half seen, wavering in shadow. It didn't move. It simply waited. The air grew colder, pressing against my skin, curling around my chest and neck. I stepped closer. The doorway seemed to stretch slightly, bending the light, folding the shadows into shapes I couldn't name. When I entered, the door slammed behind me, loud and final, yet no one was there. The room pressed close, quiet but alive. Shadows pooled in corners, bending toward me, folding along the walls, patient, deliberate, aware. I wanted to step back, to escape, but something held me, an unseen weight, a quiet insistence that I should stay, even for a moment too long. The doorway waited still, its presence lingering just outside the edge of my vision. Every breath felt heavier, every heartbeat magnified, as if the house itself measured me, watched me, folding time into silence. I left eventually, careful, slow, deliberate. The hallway felt different after that, heavier. The doorway remained in memory, patient, a threshold some things should never cross. Even now, when I walk the hall, I feel it pressing at the edges of my vision, waiting, patient, deliberate, reminded me that some doors are not meant to be opened. The farmhouse fell into silence, so complete it pressed against my ears. Every breath I took echoed like a shout, hollow and loud in the stillness. The shadows clung to corners, stretching along the walls, patient and unmoving. I walked slowly, careful, feeling the weight of the quiet pressing into my chest. Each step seemed to amplify the emptiness, the pauses between my heartbeat, and the next step stretching long, deliberate, almost alive. The air was cold, thick, heavy with anticipation. It pressed against my skin and lungs, curling in slow, deliberate patterns. I could feel something in the pauses, lingering, aware, watching, waiting. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint rustle of the house, was magnified in the silence, folding into the corners, wrapping around me. I stopped. The stillness pressed in closer. A weight I could not move, a presence that did not speak, but existed in every shadow, every breath I drew. I tried to shake it off, stepping forward, but the silence followed, patient, deliberate, like it had taken note of every movement, every heartbeat, every whisper thought. Even as I reached another room, the stillness remained, clinging heavy, folding the shadows and the darkness into memory, reminding me that silence can scream, and that some houses do not forgive. Dawn broke slowly, pale light spilling across the wet grass. Fog curled along the edges of the field, thick and damp, hiding the world beyond. And there it was. A figure stood at the far edge, pale, still, unmoving. It watched me silently, unblinking, pressing against the fog with its presence. I stepped closer. The grass whispered beneath my feet, soft, deliberate. The figure remained, patient, a hollow weight in the morning light. When I blinked, it seemed to dissolve, melting into the mist like smoke carried by an unseen breeze. I called out softly. No sound returned, only the quiet of the field, heavy and patient, pressing against my chest. I reached the spot where it had stood. Nothing remained but dew on the grass and the faint imprint of absence. Yet the emptiness felt alive, watching, aware. The fog curled around my legs, damp and cold, and I knew the figure had followed me, not in body, but in memory, in presence. It lingered along the edges of my vision, A patient wait that did not leave. Even as the sun rose higher, warming the wet earth and breaking the mist into thin threads, I felt in the quiet spaces behind my eyes. Pressing close, patient, unblinking, I walked back toward the farmhouse, the memory of that figure heavy in my chest. Though it had vanished, I knew it would follow, patient, silent, in memory of nothing else. The farmhouse was quiet, the fog from the fields seeping through cracks in the windows. I moved slowly through the rooms, the floorboards groaning beneath my careful steps. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, heavy, patient, waiting. In the corner, the final lantern flickered. Soft, pale light trembling against the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and bend at their own will. I approached slowly, every step measured. The silence pressing around me, thick and deliberate. The shadows seemed aware of me, leaning, curling, folding into shapes I could barely understand. A soft sigh passed over me. Not wind, not breath, but something else. Delicate, patient, a farewell that carried weight beyond the words I could hear. I reached the lantern, careful not to touch it. The light flickered again, pale and insistent, casting shadows that lingered in the corners, patient and deliberate. The house felt alive, not threatening, but aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every thought. I stepped back, letting the glow settle in my vision. Even as I turned to leave, the light seemed to follow, lingering along the edges of the room, pressing against the back of my eyes, a reminder that the farmhouse never truly lets go. The fog outside thickened, curling around the windows and doors. I walked to the exit slowly, each step careful. The lantern continued to flicker, its pale glow reaching into the dark corners of my mind, patient, quiet, eternal. Even when I left the house behind, the memory of that light stayed with me, soft, persistent, a presence that would follow in thought, deliberate, patient, never truly gone.